She whispered it so quietly he almost didn't catch it. "They're here for me." 3 words. No panic, no screaming, just a woman in a $12,000 gown pressing herself against a marble pillar, her eyes tracking the armed men fanning across the ballroom floor with a kind of practiced efficiency that had nothing to do with robbery. Caleb Rourke looked at her. Then he looked at the men. His mop handle was still in his hand. He set it down very carefully against the wall. And in the next 15 seconds, something shifted in his face that made Audra Sinclair stop breathing entirely, because whatever she thought she was looking at, it wasn't a janitor anymore. If you're new here, welcome. Hit that subscribe button and follow this story all the way to the end. Because I promise you, you don't want to miss what happens next. Drop a like and tell me in the comments what city and country you're watching from. I want to see how far this story has traveled. Now let's get into it. The Hargrove Hotel had been standing on the corner of 5th Ave and Meridian for 62 years, and in all that time it had hosted presidents, celebrities, corporate titans, and once famously a minor European royal who left without paying his bill. The ballroom on the 14th floor could seat 400 people comfortably and another 100 uncomfortably. And on the night of the Sinclair Technologies Innovation Summit, it was doing exactly the latter. Caleb Rourke had been working the 14th floor since 4 in the afternoon. He'd refilled the soap dispensers in the service restroom near the kitchen, replaced 2 burned-out bulbs in the corridor leading to the freight elevator, and spent 40 minutes trying to track down a slow drain in the utility sink that maintenance had flagged 3 weeks ago, and nobody had gotten around to fixing. He found the problem a wad of cloth someone had shoved down the drain, probably a catering towel, and fished it out with a pair of pliers. Rinsed his hands twice, and moved on to the next item on his clipboard. By 7:30, the ballroom was full. Caleb worked the perimeter. That was the word his supervisor, Dale, used, perimeter, which was a fancy way of saying. Caleb pushed his cart along the outer edges of the room, emptied the small chrome trash receptacles near the service stations, wiped down the folding tables in the corridor where the catering staff staged their trays, and tried to stay out of the way of 400 people who were absolutely certain he didn't exist. He was used to it. He'd been at the Hargrove for 3 years. Before that, 2 years at a commercial cleaning outfit that serviced office buildings downtown. Before that, a stretch of months he didn't like to think about. Living in a 1-bedroom apartment in Tucson with June sleeping on a pull-out sofa, eating cereal for dinner because he hadn't figured out yet how to be a civilian. Before that was a different life. A different person, technically. The paperwork said so. June was 9 now. She was with Mrs. Faraday downstairs. Mrs. Faraday being their neighbor on the 3rd floor of their building, a 71-year-old retired schoolteacher who watched June on evenings when Caleb had to work late and charged exactly nothing for the service, which Caleb had tried to compensate for by fixing her radiator, her leaky bathroom faucet, and once, memorably, a section of her kitchen ceiling that had developed an alarming sag. June had texted him at 6:15. Mrs. Faraday made chicken soup. It has too many carrots, but I'm being polite. He'd smiled at that. Still had his phone in his breast pocket. Could feel it against his ribs. He was wiping down the service station nearest the east wall when the lights in the corridor flickered. Not the ballroom lights those held, warm and gold and expensive. Corridor lights. The service passage lights. The kind of lights that only staff and security would notice. Running along the ceiling of the hallway behind the ballroom's back wall where the catering carts moved in and out. Caleb stopped wiping. He stood very still and listened, the way he used to listen in places where sound meant the difference between breathing and not. The flicker lasted 2 seconds. Then the corridor lights steadied. The small indicator panel near the service elevator, the one that showed building system status. The kind of panel that guests never looked at, and maintenance checked twice a shift that panel had gone dark. Caleb set his rag down and walked to it. Pressed the test button. Nothing. Communications hub was offline. He didn't know yet what that meant. He thought power fluctuation, maybe. Aging infrastructure. The Hargrove was 62 years old, and its electrical system had been patched and repatched so many times that nobody fully understood it anymore, least of all the building's current facilities director, a man named Greer, who dealt with problems by writing strongly worded emails. Caleb was about to key his radio to check in with the front desk when he heard the doors. Not the main ballroom doors, those were open, attended by 2 young men in evening wear who stood at either side like decorative columns. Service doors. The ones that opened from the stairwell on the far side of the corridor, the ones that were supposed to require a key card and almost never got used because the freight elevator was easier. 3 men came through. They were dressed wrong. Not in uniforms, not in evening wear, but in the kind of dark, layered clothing that was practical rather than fashionable gear that allowed movement. Each of them carried a bag. The bags were the right size and shape for things Caleb had spent years learning to recognize. He didn't move. He was 30 feet away, half hidden by the catering station, and they hadn't looked in his direction yet. They were moving toward the ballroom's rear service entrance, communicating in short, clipped exchanges that were almost too quiet to hear. Almost. North side is clear. We go on the count. Already down. Harv confirmed, remember, the primary doesn't leave the room. Caleb did not panic. This was a point of pride, and also a point of biology. His nervous system had been conditioned, over years of training and one very bad operation in a very cold part of the world, to respond to threat not with adrenaline-driven stupidity, but with something closer to a cold, methodical calm. His heart rate went up. His breathing slowed down. Everything sharpened. He counted 3 men in the corridor, calculated angles, noted that his radio was likely useless if comms were down, that his phone might still work on cellular, and that between him and 400 civilians in a sealed ballroom were 3 armed men who had just referenced a primary who was not supposed to leave the room. He already knew who the primary was. He'd watched Audra Sinclair speak for 40 minutes at the podium that evening. Not because he was interested in defense technology or innovation summits or any of what she was selling, but because he'd been mopping the area near the stage and she'd been up there talking, and he had nothing else to look at. She was good at it, direct. No performance anxiety, the kind of speaker who didn't need the audience to like her. When she'd stepped off the stage, people had crowded around her, and she'd navigated it the way someone navigates traffic, efficiently, without breaking stride. He'd noticed that she noticed things. Her eyes moved the room. Right now, those eyes were on the other side of that wall, completely unaware. Caleb pulled out his phone and dialed 911. The call connected. He pressed himself against the wall, spoke in a voice barely above a breath. Location, building, floor, nature of threat, number of individuals he could confirm, weapon status as best he could assess. The dispatcher was calm. He answered her questions in order, without embellishment. How long? He asked. Units are being dispatched now, sir. Stay on the line and stay hidden. I can't, he said. They're already moving. He ended the call, dropped the phone in his breast pocket, and picked up the only thing near him that was solid and useful, the long-handled metal ladle from the catering station, which weighed about 3 pounds and was not a weapon by any normal definition. He moved toward the ballroom. Inside, it happened fast. The service doors came open, and the men entered in a formation that was practiced and deliberate, one to the east wall, one sweeping north toward the stage, one moving directly into the center of the room. They had their weapons up before the first person screamed. Screaming, once it started, was immediate and total. Nobody move. Hands where I can see them. Down, everybody down. 400 people in formal wear had approximately 3 seconds to process what was happening before the collective survival instinct took over and they dropped. Chairs scraped. Women's heels caught in carpet. A man near the front knocked over an entire table of champagne flutes, and the sound of breaking glass cut through the screaming like something physical. Caleb was already inside. He'd come through the same service entrance, 30 seconds behind the 3 men, and what he saw in those first moments told him things they hadn't intended to show him. The one at the east wall had taken a position near the emergency exit, not to block escape, but to watch it, which meant there were people on the other side. The one at the north end of the room, near the stage, was performing crowd control, but his eyes kept returning to a specific section of the room, the table where Audra Sinclair had been sitting. And the third man, the one in the center, he was moving. Slowly, systematically toward her. Caleb had been right. This was an extraction. The man in the center, mid-40s, built heavy across the shoulders, moving with a confidence that came from doing this before, was 10 feet from Audra's position. She was on the floor behind her table with her communications director, a young woman named Tessa, who was white-faced and not breathing correctly. Audra herself was pressed against the table leg with her palms flat on the carpet, and she was watching the man approach with an expression that was more calculation than terror. Caleb was 20 feet away, moving along the outer wall, invisible in the chaos. The serving station directly to his left held a coffee urn. Commercial-grade stainless steel, full probably 30 pounds. He grabbed it off the station without breaking stride, swung it in a tight arc, and connected with the back of the approaching man's head. The sound was not clean. It was heavy and ugly, the kind of sound that didn't belong in a hotel ballroom, and the man went down sideways and didn't get up. Caleb didn't stop moving. The man at the east wall had turned at the sound. He had maybe a second and a half of confusion before he started raising his weapon. And Caleb was already inside his reach, using the geometry of close quarters that he'd spent years drilling until it lived in his hands rather than his head. The man's arm was redirected, his balance broken, and then the catering cart that Caleb shoved into him from the side made the math very simple. He went into the wall. He stayed there, 2 down. The third, the one at the north end, was shouting something into a radio and swinging his weapon toward Caleb. 300 people were on the floor between them, and Caleb understood immediately that a direct approach was impossible. He dropped behind a table, used the moment to breathe, to think, to map the architecture of the room, the way he'd mapped it over 3 years of working at the position of the pillars, the service passages, the lighting rigs overhead, the exact dimensions of the space he'd been moving through invisibly for longer than he could easily count. He knew a way. The decorative column at the northwest corner was close enough to the service passage entrance that someone his size could get behind it, move through the passage, and come out near the stage without crossing open floor. It would take 40 seconds, longer than he wanted. He looked at Audra Sinclair. She was looking at him. Their eyes met across 30 feet of marble flooring and overturned furniture and 300 people trying not to breathe. And something passed between them that wasn't a conversation but functioned like one. He pointed to the floor. She nodded once, sharp, the kind of nod that meant I understand, not I agree, and pressed herself flat. He moved. The service passage was dark and smelled like cleaning solution and old carpet and the particular kind of heat that comes from aging ductwork. Caleb moved through it by memory, his shoulder brushing the left wall, counting his steps. 14 steps to the bend, 6 more to the stage access point. He pushed the door open an inch and looked through the gap. Third man had moved toward the center of the room, losing sight of where Caleb had gone and making the mistake of positioning himself with his back partially to the stage. He was still on the radio, still talking. Caleb came out of the darkness behind him. It wasn't graceful. Caleb would think about this later and acknowledge that it was not graceful at all. It was fast and ugly and worked more because the man was distracted than because Caleb executed it well. His knee was wrong for a second, the old injury from a boat deck in weather he didn't like to remember, and he felt it give slightly as he closed the distance. Close quarters didn't require grace. It required commitment, and commitment he had. The third man went down. Caleb stood in the middle of the ballroom, breathing harder than he wanted to, his knee complaining in a way it would continue to do for the next 3 days, and looked at the room. People were still on the floor. The silence after violence is its own specific kind of silence, thick and strange, the absence of noise that was itself a kind of noise. Somewhere near the back, a woman was crying quietly. A man's voice shaking, stay down. Caleb's voice came out rougher than he intended. All of you. Hands visible, nobody moves. Stay exactly where you are. He looked toward Audra. She was already sitting up. I told you to stay down, he said. I know, she said. I'm checking if Tessa is okay. He looked at Tessa, who was pressed against the floor, with her eyes squeezed shut and her hands over the back of her head. He looked at Audra, who had her hand on Tessa's shoulder and was saying her name softly. He didn't say anything else. He moved to the east wall, checked the emergency exit, confirmed it was sealed from the outside, which meant whoever was on the other side had either left or was waiting, and then moved back through the service corridor to check the stairwell. Empty. When he came back into the ballroom, Audra was standing. She was looking at him with an expression he recognized, but couldn't immediately categorize. Not gratitude exactly, not shock exactly, something that lived in the overlap between them. Her dress was dusty at the knees, and her hair had come half down from whatever it had been arranged into. And she was holding her own shoes in her left hand because she'd taken them off somewhere in the chaos. She looked very different from the woman on the stage, and also exactly the same. "Who are you?" she said. It wasn't an accusation. It wasn't even really a question, the way she said it. It was something else, the beginning of a sentence she didn't have the rest of yet. Caleb looked at her for a long moment. Maintenance, he said. She looked at the two men on the floor, at the third closer to the stage. Coffee urn he'd left rolling slowly near the east wall. She looked back at him. Right, she said. In the distance, from several floors below, and then several directions at once, the sound of sirens arrived. And somewhere in the building later, much later, when the police had arrived and the room had been secured and the three men were in custody, and everything was being photographed and documented, and the long, grinding machinery of official response was underway, one of the captured men was found with a phone that had sent a single encrypted message in the 12 seconds before his hands were cuffed. The investigators would find the message eventually. They would show it to the right people. Those people would go quiet in a particular way that meant the information was significant. 2 words: the ghost. The police arrived in force 6 units, then 12, then what felt like half the city's tactical response capacity flooding into the Hargroves lobby and stairwells and service corridors, while 400 people in expensive clothing sat on a ballroom floor and tried to process what they'd just watched happen. Caleb stood near the east wall with his hands visible and his ID clipped to his breast pocket and answered every question that was put to him in the same flat, patient tone he used when explaining to building management why a particular piece of equipment needed replacing. Yes, he worked here. Yes, he'd been in the corridor when the men entered. Yes, he'd called it in. He pointed to the 3 men on the floor, gave the responding officers a clean account of what he'd done and in what order, and said nothing that wasn't strictly responsive to what he was asked. The lead detective, a compact woman named Solace, with reading glasses pushed up on her forehead and the exhausted expression of someone who'd been called back in from a dinner she hadn't finished, walked the room with him twice. She had a way of asking questions that wasn't quite accusatory but wasn't quite not, and Caleb recognized the technique and didn't take it personally. Maintenance worker, she said on the second pass. Not a question. Yes, ma'am. Took down 3 armed men with a coffee urn and a catering cart, and some other things. Yeah. She wrote something in her notebook. You have training. Some, he said. She looked up from the notebook. He looked back at her. She wrote something else. We're going to need a more complete statement, she said. I know, he said. I'll be here. Audra Sinclair was 20 feet away, seated in a chair that someone had brought for her, talking to 2 officers while Tessa sat beside her with a foil emergency blanket around her shoulders that she clearly didn't need but hadn't taken off. Audra was calm in the way that some people are calm in a crisis, not because the fear isn't there, but because they've learned to run the rest of themselves separately from it. She answered questions in complete sentences. She didn't cry. And every so often her eyes moved across the room and found Caleb, and then moved away again. He noticed. He didn't know what to do with it, so he set it aside. What he couldn't set aside was the quality of what had just happened. Not the violence of it. Violence, he understood, had made a kind of uneasy peace with years ago, but the precision of it. The 3 men who'd come through those service doors were not hired muscle. They were not opportunists or organized criminals running a kidnapping scheme out of desperation. They moved like people who had done this before, in other rooms, in other countries, under worse conditions. The formation they'd used entering the ballroom. The way the one at the east wall had positioned himself relative to the exit. The radio communication, clipped and coded. The fact that they'd taken the building's communications offline before entering, not jammed it, which any reasonably equipped criminal outfit could manage, but selectively taken it offline, which required knowledge of the building's system architecture that you didn't get from walking through the lobby twice. Someone had done reconnaissance, real reconnaissance, kind that took time and resources and people who knew what they were doing. Caleb knew what that meant, and it made the ballroom feel smaller and the night feel longer than it had 30 minutes ago. He called Mrs. Faraday from the corridor outside the ballroom at 9:47. She picked up on the second ring, which was better than he'd hoped. Mr. Rourke, she said. She always called him Mr. Rourke. He'd asked her not to 3 or 4 times, and she'd never adjusted. Mrs. Faraday, I'm going to be later than I thought. There was a situation at the hotel. A pause. I heard something on the news. Are you all right? I'm fine. She's asleep. Has been for an hour. She made me watch a documentary about humpback whales before she'd agree to go to bed, which I consider a fair trade. He exhaled. Okay, thank you. I'll be there as soon as I can. Take your time, she said. The couch is passable. Stood in the corridor for a moment after the call, the noise of the ballroom behind him voices. Radio static, the particular institutional sound of an emergency in its cleanup phase, and he thought about June asleep in Mrs. Faraday's apartment, curled on the pullout, with probably 3 stuffed animals she would deny caring about. He thought about the whale documentary and the small, serious way June had of presenting information she'd just learned, like she was reporting it to someone who needed to be briefed. He went back inside. The 3 men had been taken into custody by the time Solis finished her preliminary work. The one Caleb had hit with the coffee urn, the one who'd been moving toward Audra, was taken out on a stretcher, conscious but not communicating. The other 2 were walked out in cuffs. A forensics team had arrived and was working the room in sections, and the guests were being moved out in groups, processed and released. The whole operation had the organized chaos of a thing that had protocols, but also had more variables than the protocols had been written to account for. Caleb was filling out a written statement at a folding table in the corridor when Audra came and sat down across from him. She'd found one of her shoes. The other was missing, apparently, and she was wearing only one, which gave her a slightly tilted quality that he suspected she was ignoring through sheer force of will. "You saved my life," she said. "I stopped 3 people from taking you somewhere," he said. "It's a little different." "Is it?" "Probably. Depends on where they were planning to take you." She was quiet for a moment. She'd gotten most of her hair back into some order, though not entirely, and there was a smear of something dust, probably from the floor across the left side of her jaw, that she hadn't noticed or hadn't bothered with. "I run a technology company," she said. "We have security people. Ex-law enforcement, a few veterans, all properly credentialed. They were in this building tonight." "I know," Caleb said. "I saw 2 of them on the north end when the men first came in. They were on the ground with everyone else. And you weren't. I was in the corridor. I saw them come through the service entrance." He paused. "And I'm harder to surprise than I look." She studied him. He held the look without particular discomfort. "What did you do?" she said, "before maintenance." "Other things," he said. She waited to see if there was more. There wasn't. She seemed to decide for the moment that this was sufficient. "They came for me specifically," she said. Not a question either. "Not the guests, not the room." "Me, yes. You knew that." Before they finished the first sentence, he said, "The one in the middle went straight to your position. The others were managing the room, not working it. They weren't there for cash or jewelry or hostages, plural." He looked at her. "Whatever you have that they want, it's specific." Something moved across her expression, not surprise, but the recognition of a conclusion she'd been moving toward herself. She folded her hands on the table. Her nails were done in some dark color that had partially chipped, probably from the floor. "There's a project," she said, and then she stopped. "I can't discuss it here." "You don't have to discuss it with me at all," he said. "No," she said slowly, "I probably do." Solis came back then, and the conversation ended, and Caleb finished his statement and signed it and was told he'd be contacted for follow-up, which he understood to mean soon and more than once. He took the service elevator down because the main elevators were still being held for official use, and he walked out through the hotel's loading dock into the damp night air of the alley behind Meridian Street, and he stood there for about 30 seconds, just breathing. Then he went back inside, because he'd left his mop cart on the 14th floor, and his jacket was hanging on a hook in the utility closet near the freight elevator, and he was not the kind of person who left his things. He was in the utility closet retrieving his jacket when he heard the radio chatter from the hallway, a plainclothes officer relaying something to someone else. The specific kind of relay that meant a piece of information had just changed the shape of a situation. He didn't catch all of it. He caught enough. Came back on the second one. The phone he had on him, message went out before we got to him. Encrypted, but they're working on the content. Feds are going to want to see this. Caleb stood in the utility closet with his jacket in his hands and his heart doing something calm and measured that nonetheless felt like a countdown. He'd known, somewhere under the adrenaline and the mechanics of the last 2 hours, that this wasn't over. The men in the ballroom were too professional to be operating without a larger structure behind them, and structures like that didn't stop because 3 of their people were in custody. They adapted. They regrouped. They sent different people. He thought about what the captured men knew. He thought about what he knew. Then he thought about June, asleep in Mrs. Faraday's apartment with her stuffed animals she didn't admit caring about, and he put his jacket on and went home. The next 4 days were a particular kind of waiting that Caleb knew how to do. which didn't mean he enjoyed it. He went to work. He took June to school. He made dinner, actual dinner, not cereal. Pasta with a jarred sauce. He dressed up with garlic and some vegetables from the back of the refrigerator. And he listened to June explain the difference between humpback and blue whale migration patterns. And he asked 2 follow-up questions that she answered at length and with great seriousness. "Are you okay?" she said on the 3rd night. He looked up from his plate. "What?" "You keep looking at the door," she said, "like you're checking something." She was 9. She was 9 and she noticed things, and he'd always known that, and it never stopped being slightly unnerving. "I'm fine," he said. "Just tired." She looked at him in the way she sometimes did, not the look of a child deciding whether to push further, but the look of someone who already knew the answer and was choosing whether to address it. She'd gotten that look from her mother. He didn't say that. "Okay," she said, and went back to her pasta. He checked the door 4 more times before she went to bed. Call from Detective Solis came on the 4th day, a Thursday, while he was replacing a HVAC filter on the 3rd floor of the Hargrove. She wanted him to come in for a follow-up conversation. She used the word conversation, which meant it was more than that. He came in the next morning. The room she put him in was not the comfortable kind. It had a table and 2 chairs, and a mirror on one wall, and a camera in the corner, and a smell that was coffee and institutional cleaning product in roughly equal measure. Solis came in with a man Caleb hadn't seen before, older, heavier, wearing a suit that was too good for local law enforcement. "Mr. Rourke," Solis said, "this is Special Agent Cord. He's been assigned to the investigation." Cord sat down. He had the patient, slightly removed quality of someone who spent a lot of time listening to people who didn't know what he already knew. "We've reviewed the security footage from the hotel," Cord said, "from that evening." "Okay," Caleb said. "The footage of the ballroom, of the corridor, of the service entrance." He paused. "Of you. I'd expect so." "What you did in that room," Cord said, "took somewhere between 4 and 6 minutes total. 3 trained armed individuals incapacitated. No civilian casualties. And you used," he glanced at something on the table, a coffee urn, a catering cart, and what appears to be a decorative serving tray at some point. "And some other things," Caleb said. Cord looked at him for a long moment. "The men we took into custody," he said, "are not local talent. 2 of them have been flagged in joint intelligence databases under operational aliases. The 3rd is still being identified, but the indicators are consistent." He folded his hands on the table. "These are professional operatives, Mr. Rourke. And the way you handled them in that ballroom is not consistent with someone who has some training." Caleb was quiet. "I'm going to ask you directly," Cord said. "And I'm going to ask you to be honest with me, because the investigation we're now running is significant, and the people involved are dangerous. And if there are things about your background that are relevant, I need to know them." "You could just run me," Caleb said. "Pull whatever's there." "We did," Cord said. Silence. "What did you find?" Caleb asked. Cord looked at him steadily. A maintenance worker from Tucson with a clean record and a 9-year-old daughter. He paused. "Before that, nothing." "Then I guess I don't know what else to tell you," Caleb said. Cord leaned back. He didn't look satisfied, but he also didn't look like a man who had expected to be. He looked like a man who was noting something down in a mental file and would return to it later. "For the time being," Cord said, "I'd ask that you remain available, and that you tell us if anything unusual occurs. Anything at all. Contact surveillance, approaches from strangers." "All right," Caleb said. And Mr. Rourke's Cord stay close to home. He didn't hear from Audra Sinclair for 6 after that, and then he did. It wasn't a call. It was a message, delivered through channels he wouldn't have expected her to have access to, not his work phone, not the number on his employment file, but a text to a number he'd given nobody in 3 years. The message was 4 words. "We need to talk." He sat with that for about an hour. Then he replied, "Where?" She sent an address. It was an office building in the financial district, 22 floors up. Private elevator, private floor. The kind of place that existed because some people had enough money that even their workspace was insulated from the normal functions of the world. He went the next afternoon. The office was large and had a wall of windows that looked out over the city at an angle that made everything below seem like a model precise, arranged, slightly unreal. Audra was standing at the windows when he came in, and she was dressed differently than she'd been at the hotel. No formal wear, just dark trousers and a shirt that was rolled at the sleeves, hair back in something simple. She looked more like herself, he thought, though he had no real basis for that assessment. You came, she said. You said we needed to talk. I wasn't sure if you would. You didn't seem like someone who she paused pursues things. Depends on the thing, he said. She moved away from the window and sat down on one side of a long table. He sat down on the other. I owe you an explanation, she said. You don't owe me anything. I'm giving you one anyway. She put a folder on the table between them. He didn't open it. My company has been developing a navigation system for the past 4 years. It's advanced enough that calling it that is a little bit of an understatement. It integrates with existing defense infrastructure in ways that current systems don't, and the calibration algorithm at its core is... She stopped, apparently selecting her words significant, enough that multiple parties have taken an interest that goes well beyond normal competitive intelligence. What kind of parties? Caleb said. Private. Well-funded. Organized in a way that governments are aware of, but can't directly touch. She opened the folder herself and turned it to face him. A name at the top. A helix. About 3 weeks ago, one of my senior engineers was found to have accessed and transmitted a partial set of the system's technical specifications. We don't know all of what was transferred. We know it wasn't the full calibration data, because that exists in exactly one place. You, he said. Me, she said. I'm the only person who has the complete calibration set. Partially by design, partially because a brief pause, it became clear early on that distributing that information created more risk than keeping it centralized. Caleb looked at the folder without touching it. So they came to the hotel to take you somewhere and make you give them the rest. What federal investigators now believe, yes. And the people at the hotel, he said slowly, they were Helix. Affiliated with. Contracted through. She closed the folder. The exact corporate structure is apparently complicated. He looked at her. You're telling me all of this because someone sent a message from inside that ballroom before the police found the phone, she said. And because the federal agent coordinating the investigation told me this morning that the content of that message has been partially decoded. She looked at him steadily. It doesn't mention me, Mr. Rourke. He was quiet. I need to understand what I'm dealing with, she said. And I have a feeling that means I need to understand who was in that room with me. He looked at his hands on the table, then back at her. How much did Cord tell you? He said. He told me you have a daughter. He told me your background before 3 years ago doesn't exist in any accessible record. She paused. And he told me that what you did in that ballroom was not something people learn from a YouTube tutorial. Caleb almost smiled at that. Almost. I'm not going to tell you classified information, he said. I'm not asking for classified information, she said. I'm asking if you're going to disappear now, or if you're going to help me figure out what comes next. It was the directness of it that he respected, even if it complicated things considerably. She wasn't performing strength or vulnerability. She was sitting across a table from a man she didn't know, whose actual background she understood to be dangerous, and asking him a straight question. That took a kind of nerve that was separate from the kind she'd shown on the ballroom floor. You have private security, he said. I had private security at the hotel, she said. They were on the floor with everyone else. He didn't have a good answer for that. I'm not disappearing, he said finally. Not a commitment exactly. Not a non-commitment either. Just the truth of where he was. She nodded. One small, precise nod. Then there's something else I need to show you, she said. What she showed him was a secondary alert from her building's security system, a flag that had been tripped 2 nights earlier by a camera on the residential floor of her penthouse. Something had moved through a blind spot in the camera coverage, a 3-second gap between angles that shouldn't have been a gap at all. Security team had reviewed it and logged it as a possible technical glitch. Caleb reviewed it and logged it as something else entirely. You're staying here tonight? He said. I have an apartment 2 floors above this office, she said. It's where I've been since. You need to not be there tonight, he said. That's a significant statement. I know. He pointed to a specific frame on the footage, a shadow at the edge of the blind spot that had a particular shape, a particular quality of deliberate stillness. This isn't a glitch. Someone walked that corridor. They timed it to the camera cycle. She looked at the screen. She didn't argue with him. All right, she said. Where do you suggest? He thought for a moment. Is there somewhere in this building that isn't your apartment, isn't registered to you, and isn't known to your regular staff? Considered. There's a client suite on the 9th floor. It's booked under a subsidiary company name, and I'm the only person in the building who has a key to it. That, he said. She called Tessa, her communications director, still white-faced and slightly over-blinking every time a door opened too fast, and told her to clear the next 2 days, which Tessa did without asking why, which told Caleb something about what Tessa had taken from the hotel. Then Audra took a bag she apparently kept packed in a cabinet behind her desk. He noted that, filed it, and they went down to the 9th floor. Client suite was quiet and impersonal and smelled like fresh linen, the generic comfort of a space that existed to reassure rather than inhabit. Audra stood in the middle of it and looked around with an expression that was very controlled. "This isn't my life," she said, more to the room than to him. "I know," he said. "I'm not someone who hides." "I know that, too," he said. "You're not hiding. You're being tactical." She made a small sound that might have been a dry laugh. He checked the suite's lock mechanisms, the window latch's 9th floor, possible but not easy, and the ventilation access panel in the bathroom, which he secured with a piece of equipment from a kit he'd started carrying again after the hotel, a habit he was neither proud of nor apologetic about. "You carry that everywhere now?" she said. "Started again after the other night," he said. "Started again," she repeated. He looked at her. "How long did you carry it before?" she said. "A while," he said. "I stopped when I thought I didn't need to." She was quiet for a moment. "And now you think you do." "I think," he said carefully, "that what happened at the hotel wasn't the end of something. It was the beginning." She absorbed that. He watched her absorb it, the small involuntary change in her breathing, the thing her jaw did, the speed with which she shut it back down. "My assistant," she said, "Tessa. The people who work for me." "I know," he said. "If this is what you think it is, we'll deal with that," he said. "One thing at a time." "That's very calm of you," she said, and it wasn't entirely a compliment. "I'm not calm," he said. "I'm just better at not showing it than most people." That stopped her. She looked at him with the same expression she'd worn on the ballroom floor, the beginning of a sentence she didn't have the rest of yet. "Caleb," she said. She said it like she was testing the name. It was the first time she'd used it. "Yeah," he said. "What happened to you?" "Before the maintenance work." Before, she gestured vaguely, "all of this." The room was quiet. Somewhere in the building's infrastructure, something cycled on an HVAC system, the low mechanical breath of a building staying alive. "Something I was part of went wrong," he said. "The kind of wrong that doesn't get corrected. It just gets filed." He looked at the window. "I had a daughter to raise. So I left." "And they let you?" "They thought I was dead," he said. The silence that followed was different from the other silences of the evening. It had weight. "They know now that you're not," she said. "Yeah," he said. She sat down on the edge of the suite sofa, not collapsing, just sitting, like someone who had been standing for a long time and had finally decided the standing wasn't proving anything. "The message from the ballroom," she said. "What did it say?" He'd been waiting for this. He'd known, from the moment Cord had mentioned the decoded message in the interview room, that she would ask eventually. "2 words," he said. "The ghost." She looked at him. "That's you," she said. "That's what they used to call me," he said. "In a different life." She didn't say anything for a long time. He stood by the window in the 9th floor suite and watched the city below and listened to the building breathe and thought about June, who was at school right now, learning something he hadn't taught her, which was both the ordinary miracle and the specific terror of raising a person. "So they know who you are," Audra said finally. "Yes. And they know about your daughter." He turned from the window. "Not yet," he said. "But they will." She looked at her hands in her lap. She looked up at him. "Then we don't have much time," she said. "No," he said. "We don't." The call from Cord came at 6:14 in the morning, which told Caleb before he answered it that the night had produced something significant. Federal agents didn't call at 6 in the morning to relay good news or routine updates. They called at 6 in the morning because something had shifted and they needed to be in the same room with you before you could process it on your own terms. "I need you to come in," Cord said. No preamble when Caleb said, "Now would be preferable." Caleb was already dressed. He'd been awake since 4:30, which was not unusual, sitting at the kitchen table with coffee he hadn't finished and the particular quality of quiet that a building has at that hour, the whole structure seeming to hold its breath before the day began. June was asleep. He'd checked on her twice, which he wouldn't have admitted to anyone. "Give me 40 minutes, he said. He arranged for Mrs. Faraday to come up and sit with June before school, telling her only that he had an early appointment. Mrs. Faraday, to her considerable credit, asked no questions beyond whether he'd eaten, and when he said yes, which was technically true if coffee counted, She made the face that indicated she did not consider this an adequate answer, but would let it pass. He took the bus to the federal building downtown, which took 26 minutes, and he spent those 26 minutes sitting near the back, watching the city come awake outside the window's delivery trucks. A man walking a very small dog with great seriousness, a woman in nursing scrubs eating a granola bar while waiting for the light to change all of it ordinary, all of it real in the way that things outside of crisis always look startlingly real once you're in one. Cord was waiting in a different room than before, larger. There was a second agent Caleb hadn't met, a younger man named Pullman, who had the slightly over-alert quality of someone still finding his footing in rooms like this. And there was a woman in the corner who wasn't introduced and didn't introduce herself, and whose presence Caleb noted and filed without comment. "We've been running the background on the 3 individuals from the hotel," Cord said when they were seated. The 2 with operational aliases checked out against joint intelligence records. One flagged against an Interpol watch list from 4 years ago. The other connected to a private military contractor that officially dissolved in 2019. Officially, Caleb said. Officially, Cord agreed. The third man, the one you hit with the urn his prince, came back this morning. He opened a folder and turned it to face Caleb. His name is Vincent Harrow, former Special Operations. British SS, technically separated in 2017. Since then, he's been connected, through several intermediary organizations, to a private military entity called Helix. Caleb looked at the photograph. The man in it was younger than the man he'd seen in the ballroom. The photograph may be 4 years old, but the posture was the same, the particular set of someone trained to occupy space efficiently. Helix, Caleb said. You've heard the name, Cord said. It wasn't a question. Audra Sinclair mentioned it, Caleb said. Cord and Pullman exchanged a look that was brief and professionally contained, but not invisible. Miss Sinclair shared some of the technical details of the situation with you, Cord said. She did. She wasn't supposed to, Cord said, without particular heat. But given the circumstances, we're not going to make it a problem. He leaned forward. What I need to tell you now is different from what Ms. Sinclair told you, and I need you to understand that what I'm about to share is significant and classified at a level that means this conversation is going to require a formal agreement before it continues. Caleb looked at him. What kind of agreement? The kind that acknowledges you already have a clearance, Cord said quietly, even if the person holding it is technically dead. The room was very still. Caleb sat back in his chair and looked at the wall for a moment, not long, maybe 3 seconds, and then looked back at Cord. What did you find, he said. Cord opened a second folder. Operation Seawolf, he said. The name landed in Caleb's chest like something physical. He didn't move. He didn't change expression. He was very practiced at not changing expression when things happened inside him. And this was a skill that had saved his life on at least 4 occasions and destroyed other things he'd cared about and would never fully get back. Classified SEAL operation, Cord continued. Executed approximately 7 years ago. Objective was interdiction of a weapons transfer network operating through 3 countries. Official record, he paused, classifies the operation as a catastrophic failure. All personnel listed as killed in action or missing, presumed dead. I know what the official record says, Caleb said. I know you do, Cord said, because you were there. More silence. Your real name, Cord said, and he said a name that Caleb had not heard in 6 years, a name that belonged to a version of himself he'd boxed up and sealed and put in a place he did not visit, appears on the Seawolf personnel manifest. Listed as killed during extraction, he was, Caleb said. Cord looked at him. Pullman looked at his notepad. The woman in the corner did not move. The message from the ballroom, Cord said. The ghost. That was an operational designation. Yes, Caleb said. Someone in that room recognized you. Or the footage got to someone who did, Caleb said. Same outcome. Cord closed the folder and set it aside in the deliberate way of a man who was reorganizing his approach. Here's what I need you to understand about where we are, he said. The hotel attack wasn't the primary objective. It was from what we can reconstruct an opportunistic acceleration of a longer plan. Helix has been building toward Project Nightingale for at least 18 months. The stolen technical specifications were step 1. Getting Ms. Sinclair was step 2. What's step 3? Caleb said. We don't know yet, Cord said. And that's the problem. The woman in the corner spoke for the first time. Her voice was level and carried the cadence of someone who'd spent years in briefing rooms. The calibration data that Ms. Sinclair holds is the missing component. The specifications the engineer transferred gave Helix the architecture. Without the calibration, it's an outline. A map with no coordinates. She paused. With the calibration, it's a weapons-grade navigation system that can penetrate current defense shielding on 17 known missile platforms. The number landed in the room and stayed there. Caleb looked at his hands on the table. And Audra is the only one who has it. The only one outside of a secure government server that Helix has already attempted to access twice in the last 6 months, the woman said. So they're going to try again, Caleb said. We are operating on the assumption that yes, they will try again, Cord said. Which is why I need to ask you something directly, and I need a direct answer. Caleb waited. Helix now knows you're alive. They know your current identity, or at minimum they know enough to find it. Which means they know about June, Caleb said. Yes. The name in Cord's mouth was wrong. Not malicious, just wrong. The way it's wrong when someone you don't know uses the name of someone you love. Caleb kept his face still and dealt with the internal architecture of that later. What are you proposing? Caleb said. We'd like your involvement in what comes next, Cord said. Officially. Temporarily recalled from inactive status under a provision that, given the unusual nature of your record, requires some creative paperwork, but is legally supportable. He paused. You know Helix's methodology now. You know the building. You know Miss Sinclair's situation, and you have demonstrated a skill set that is currently useful. You want me to work with you, Caleb said. We want you to work with us to protect Ms. Sinclair and prevent Helix from completing what they started, Cord said. And we want to make sure your daughter is safe while that happens. Caleb was quiet for a long time. Long enough that Pullman shifted in his chair and glanced at Cord, and Cord made a small gesture that meant wait. What happens to June while this is going on? Caleb said. We can arrange protective placement? No, Caleb said. No strangers. No official placement. He looked at Cord. I arrange her safety myself. You don't touch that part. Cord considered. Within limits, not within limits, Caleb said. That part is mine. Everything else we can talk about. Another exchange of looks across the table. The woman in the corner made no expression at all. All right, Cord said. He told Mrs. Faraday that evening. Not everything, not Seawolf, not Helix, not the calibration data or the weapons platform or the 2 words on the encrypted message. But enough. Enough that she understood that the situation was real and not going away, and that he needed June somewhere safe for an indeterminate amount of time, and that this was not a request he was making lightly. Mrs. Faraday sat across from him at her kitchen table, with her hands folded around a cup of tea she wasn't drinking, and listened to all of it without interrupting, which was one of the things he'd always quietly respected about her. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Her mother's family, she said. I've been in contact, he said. Her aunt in Portland, June, speaks of her. She does, he said. June likes her. More importantly, June is comfortable there. He paused. Spoken to Renata, she's willing. Does June know? Not yet. He looked at the table. I'm going to tell her tonight. I'm going to try to explain it in a way that doesn't... He stopped. There was no clean end to that sentence, and they both knew it. She's going to be frightened, Mrs. Faraday said. I know. And angry, possibly. Probably, he said. She's been angry with me before. She'll survive it. Mrs. Faraday looked at him with the particular expression of someone who had been watching him for 3 years and had formed conclusions she'd never shared directly. Will you? She said. He didn't answer that. June took it better and worse than he expected, which was exactly how she took most things. She sat on her bed while he explained carefully, in the edited version that was still honest enough to be real, and she listened with her arms crossed over her chest and her expression doing several things at once. When he finished, she was quiet for what felt like a long time, but was probably 45 seconds. Is someone going to try to hurt you? She said. Some people might try, he said. I'm going to try harder to make sure they don't. That's not the same as no, she said. No, he said. It's not. She looked at the whale model on her desk, half finished, the gray plastic pieces laid out in order, because that was how she did everything. In order, methodically, one piece at a time. She looked at it for a while. I don't want to go to Portland, she said. I know. Aunt Renata is fine, but her house smells like incense, and she doesn't have good Wi-Fi. You can read, he said. I read all the time, she said. That's not the point. She looked at him. The point is, I don't want to go somewhere else while something happens to you. Nothing is going to happen to me, he said. Dad. She said it the way she sometimes did, just the word, flat and pointed, which meant, I know you're telling me what I want to hear. And we both know that, so please stop. He exhaled. He sat down on the edge of the bed next to her. I can't promise nothing will happen, he said. What I can promise is that I know what I'm doing. I've done this before, and I need you somewhere I'm not worried about you, so that I can focus on making sure I come back. Quiet. Biscuit, she said eventually. What? If I have to go to Portland, she said. When this is over, can we get a dog? He looked at her for a moment. Where did that come from? I've been thinking about it for a while, she said, with great dignity. I just decided now was a good time to bring it up. He almost laughed. The impulse surprised him the genuine kind, not the kind people perform when they want someone to feel better. When this is over, he said, we'll talk about a dog. That means yes, she said. It means we'll talk, he said. She unfolded her arms and leaned against him briefly, the way she did when she was working at something, working at being okay with a thing she wasn't quite okay with yet. He put his arm around her. They sat there for a minute, not saying anything. I love you, she said, muffled slightly because her face was against his shoulder. Yeah, he said. I know. He drove her to the airport 2 days later. She had one suitcase and a backpack and the half-finished whale model packed carefully in bubble wrap, and she cried a little at the gate, which she would have preferred not to, and he held on to her for slightly longer than he meant to, which he would also have preferred not to. Then she went through security and turned once to look at him, and he waved, and she turned back around and walked forward, the way she walked into everything head up, keeping her pace, dealing with the part she couldn't control by moving through it. He stood at the window until her gate door closed. Then he drove back to the city. He was 3 blocks from the Hargrove out of habit, or some oblique attachment to the routine of the last 3 years. He'd driven that direction without deciding to when his phone buzzed. Audra, something is wrong at the penthouse. Security system is flagging.
I'm in the building.
He called her immediately. Where in the building, he said. My office, 9th floor. Her voice was level, but had an edge to it that hadn't been there in their previous conversations, a tension held just below the surface, the kind that comes from watching a situation you'd hoped was past start moving again. The system is showing a breach on the residential floor. 42nd floor. Is your security team there? 2 of them went up to check, she said. That was 4 minutes ago, and I haven't heard back. 4 minutes was too long. Stay where you are, he said. Lock the office door. Don't open it unless you hear my voice. Caleb, 2 minutes away, he said. Don't move. He parked badly, left the car running for 3 seconds before remembering and going back to kill the engine, and went through the building's service entrance at the ground level, a door he knew because he'd worked this building twice on maintenance contracts, different floors, but the infrastructure was the same architect and the service passages ran on the same logic. He took the stairs to 9. Audra had locked the door. He said his name and she opened it, and she was holding a glass paperweight in her right hand, with the particular grip of someone who had decided it was going to be a weapon if required, which he noted and did not comment on. Security team, he said. Still not responding, she said. I've called Cord's office. Good, he looked at the room. The windows on this floor faced east, toward the secondary building entrance. What do you know about the layout on 42? My penthouse is the full floor, she said. 2 staircases, the main elevator lobby, and a service exit on the west side. 3 main rooms off a central hall, security cameras. 8 of them. 4 interior, 4 covering the exterior access points. She had her laptop open on the table, the security feed pulled up. He moved to look at it. 4 of the 8 cameras showed static. The 4 remaining showed empty rooms, which was either good or the kind of bad that was staged. Someone cut 4 cameras and left 4 running, he said. The ones that are running are the ones showing empty space. She understood what that meant. They wanted us to see the empty rooms. They wanted whoever was watching to see empty rooms, he said. It's a lure. Someone is already up there. He looked at the feeds again. The service exit camera on the west side was one of the 4 showing static, which meant someone had cut it first, which meant the service exit was the entry point. If I were going to move from 42 down to 9, he said, mostly to himself, I'd use the service staircase. It's faster and doesn't require passing the elevator lobby. He looked at Audra. Is there a secondary lock on this door? Not the electronic one. Manual. She crossed to the door and slid a bolt. He hadn't seen old hardware, probably original to the building, the kind that electronic system upgrades didn't bother to remove because they didn't register it as worth the effort. Good. There's something else, she said. Tell me. Tessa called me 20 minutes ago, before the alarm. She looked at her phone on the table, the screen still showing Tessa's contact. She said someone had been following her for the past 2 days. She was heading to the police station when she called. Something cold moved through him. Not panic, it was past the register of panic, into something quieter and more operational. Did she make it? He said. I don't know. She hasn't called back. Audra's voice was still controlled, but the effort was showing now, the held tension less contained. She has a daughter. She's 7. He didn't say what he was thinking. He said, we'll find out where she is. He moved to the window and looked at the street below. Cord's people would be on their way. Audra had said she'd called, and Cord was not the kind of man who deployed slowly. But on their way was not the same as here, and the gap between those two things was exactly the space in which bad outcomes lived. The sound came from the ceiling. Both of them looked up at the same moment. A sound in the ventilation, not the regular mechanical cycling, but something distinct within it. A pressure change, a weight where weight shouldn't be. A ventilation shaft, wide enough for someone to move through if they were compact enough and determined enough. Caleb looked at the ventilation panel in the ceiling of the office suite. Then he looked at Audra. Bathroom, he said. Now, lock it from the inside. Caleb, Audra. He said it the way you say a name when the time for discussion is over. Move. She moved. He heard the bathroom door close, heard the lock engage. He positioned himself against the wall beside the office's interior door, not in front of it, not visible to anyone coming in, but at the angle that gave him the half-second of surprise that was the only advantage available. He waited. The ventilation panel in the ceiling of the corridor outside the office suite came down with a sound like a held breath releasing. He heard it through the wall. Then footsteps, precise and very quiet, someone who knew how to distribute their weight. The door handle moved. The electronic lock held. A pause. Then the sound of a bypass device, small, efficient, the magnetic overrides, that cost enough money to tell you something about who was using them. The electronic lock clicked open. The manual bolt held. Another pause. Longer this time. Then the footsteps moved away from the door, down the corridor toward the secondary office suite entrance at the far end of the hall. Caleb moved. He came out of the main office door into the corridor. At the same moment, the operative reached the secondary entrance, and what he registered in the fractional second of assessment was a woman, compact and fast, dressed in the dark layered gear he'd already seen once before in a hotel ballroom. She had something in her right hand that wasn't a gun, but functioned like one in a confined space. She was faster than he expected. That was the honest accounting of what happened. In the next 30 seconds, she was faster than he expected, and better trained than the men from the hotel. And the fight was not clean. It was not practiced. It was two people in a hallway, working through the specific ugly problem of each trying to stop the other by whatever means were immediately available. His knee gave again. The same one, the same fractional way. She caught him across the left ear with something that made his vision jump. Put her into the wall twice, and she came off it twice. He was bigger. That was, finally, the arithmetic that mattered. Not skill, not technique size, and leverage, and the simple fact that she was trying to control a person who outweighed her by 50 pounds and had decided not to be controlled. He got her arm behind her back in a hold that meant she could struggle, or she could not dislocate her shoulder, and she went still. Stay down, he said. Federal agents are in this building. You stay still, and this goes better for you. She said nothing. He heard the bathroom door open. Don't, he said, not turning around. Stay in there. I'm out, Audra said. I heard the mic. She stopped. He heard her stop, heard the small, sharp intake of breath. Caleb, I know, he said. Give me a second. He used the operative's own equipment, a set of zip ties from the tactical vest she was wearing to secure her, then moved her against the wall and stepped back and finally looked at Audra. She was standing in the bathroom doorway, holding the door frame with one hand and the glass paperweight still in the other. She looked at the woman on the floor. She looked at Caleb. She looked at his left ear, which was bleeding. You're hurt, she said. I'll live, he said. He touched his ear. The bleeding wasn't serious, a cut from whatever she'd had in her hand, already slowing. I need you to call Cord directly, he said. Tell him we have a second operative in custody, and I need his team in this building in the next 10 minutes. He paused. And I need someone to find Tessa. Audra was already dialing. He watched her the way she made the call, steady and precise, giving Cord the information in the order it was needed, not the order that the adrenaline wanted her to use, which was its own kind of skill. He looked at the operative on the floor. She was young, Late 20s maybe, and she was looking up at him with an expression that was professionally empty, but had something behind it, not fear. More like the particular contained fury of someone who had lost a round they'd expected to win. "Who sent you?" he said. "Nothing. Helix," he said. "You're with Helix." Nothing, but a slight shift in the orbital muscles around her eyes that confirmed it. "Tell whoever you're reporting to," he said, "that the calibration data is already beyond reach. They're done here." He didn't know if that was true. He said it anyway. Cord's team arrived in 9 minutes. Caleb counted. The debrief took 3 hours, which was 2.5 hours longer than Caleb would have chosen, but it produced something that changed the shape of the whole situation. One of Cord's technical analysts, working on the intelligence recovered from the operative's equipment, the bypass device, a secondary phone, a small data drive, found a thread that connected Helix's operational structure to something Cord's office had been mapping for months. A name, Darius Kessler. Cord said it in the debrief room with the particular flatness of someone saying a name they'd been trying to attach to something concrete for a long time. "He's the architecture behind Helix," Cord said. "We've had him as a theoretical node in the network for 8 months. We've never been able to place him in direct operational command of anything specific enough to act on." "Now you can," Caleb said. "We're closer," Cord said, which was a different thing, and they both knew it. "The operative you took down tonight, her communications log shows a direct encrypted channel that our techs are still working through. If there's anything in that channel that ties to Kessler directly." "How long?" Caleb said. 12 hours, maybe more. Caleb looked at the table. 12 hours was a specific amount of time. It was also a window, and windows worked in both directions. He thought about the operative on the floor and the bypass device and the 4 cameras on the 42nd floor that had been cut in a specific sequence that showed coordination. He thought about Tessa, who had called Audra and then gone silent, and whose 7-year-old daughter existed somewhere in the city, having no idea what kind of night her mother was having. "Did you find Tessa?" he said. Cord glanced at Pullman. "She made it to the police station," Pullman said. "She's there now. She's okay." Something released in Caleb's chest. Not all the way, but enough. He looked at Audra across the debrief room table. She'd been in and out of the room during the 3 hours answering questions separately, being walked through the technical components with the woman from the corner whose name had turned out to be Vasquez and who that wasn't technically part of any agency Caleb could name. Now Audra was back, sitting across from him, and she had a bandage on her left hand from a cut she'd gotten on the bathroom doorframe, which she hadn't mentioned and he hadn't noticed until now. "You're bleeding," he said. "You said that earlier about yourself," she said. "Yeah, but you'll live, I know." She looked at her hand. "So will I." He almost said something. He stopped. "The thing you said to her," Audra said. "The operative. About the calibration data being beyond reach." "I was bluffing," he said. "I know," she said, "but we could make it true." He looked at her. "If the calibration data were actually secured," she said. "Not on me, not on a server they've already tried to breach moved, physically, to a location they can't anticipate." She paused. "It changes the logic of coming after me." "They'd still come after you to find out where it was moved," he said. "Maybe," she said. "Or maybe securing the data buys enough time for Cord's people to work through the communications log and find Kessler." She looked at him directly. "I'm not talking about hiding. I'm talking about restructuring what they're chasing." He sat with that for a moment. The logic was not clean. There were too many variables, too many moving parts, too many things that could go sideways in ways neither of them could predict. But there was something in it, a pivot if not a solution. "You'd have to trust me with where the calibration data goes," he said. "I already trust you with considerably more than that," she said. The room was very quiet. The operative's equipment sat in evidence bags on a side table, and somewhere in the building Cord's tech analysts were working through encrypted channels, and somewhere across the city Tessa was sitting in a police station with 2 officers and a cup of bad coffee. And somewhere in Portland June was probably lying awake in a room that smelled like incense, thinking about whale migration patterns and a dog she'd already decided was coming. And somewhere beyond all of that, somewhere with no face yet and no location but a name now, a real name, Darius Kessler, was looking at whatever intelligence he had and deciding what the next move was going to be. The problem was that Caleb knew exactly what kind of man made the moves Kessler had made. He'd worked beside them and against them, and he understood in the specific way of long experience that men like Kessler didn't stop because a plan failed. They adapted. They found the leverage that hadn't been found yet. And there was one piece of leverage that Kessler hadn't used. Not yet. Caleb looked at the evidence bags and at Cord's closed door and at the city outside the building's high windows. And he understood, with a clarity that felt like cold water, that the 12 hours Cord had estimated were not going to be 12 hours of waiting. They were going to be 12 hours of Kessler doing the same math Caleb was doing and arriving at the same answer. Picked up his phone and called Portland. It rang 4 times. Then Renata's voice, groggy and alarmed. "Is June awake?" he said. Pause. "She was up at midnight. She fell back asleep about an hour ago." "I need you to go check on her," he said, "right now. Don't put the phone down." He heard Renata moving through her house, the particular acoustic of a person walking quickly on hardwood floors, a door opening. Then, "She's here. She's asleep." "Caleb, what? Keep her home from school tomorrow," he said. "Don't answer the door unless you know who it is. I'm going to call you in the morning." "You're scaring me," Renata said. "Good," he said. "Be scared. It means you'll be careful." He ended the call and sat with the phone in his hand for a moment, and then set it face down on the table and looked at Audra. "We need to move faster than 12 hours, he said. She looked at him steadily. "Then tell me what you need." The 12 hours Cord had estimated became 9, and the 9 became 6, and somewhere around 3 in the morning the number stopped mattering, because the phone call that changed everything came at 3:47, and it wasn't from Cord. It was from Tessa. Audra picked up on the first ring. Caleb watched her face in the dim light of the 9th floor office suite, where they'd been working through the night, Audra cross-referencing Helix's known communication patterns with Vasquez's intelligence framework. Caleb sitting across from her, doing the thing he'd learned to do in long surveillance operations, which was to stay alert without burning through the alertness he'd need later. He watched her answer, watched her listen, watched the color leave her face in a way that was very specific and very fast. "When?" Audra said. Her voice had gone flat the way voices go flat when the mind is doing something too serious for tone. "How long ago?" Tessa, listen to me. Are you hurt?" Another pause longer. "Stay on the line. Don't hang up." She looked at Caleb. "They took her," she said. "She left the police station 2 hours ago. An officer walked her to her car. She drove 3 blocks and Audra stopped. Steadied. She woke up in a building she doesn't recognize. She has her phone. It wasn't taken. They left her the phone." Caleb understood that immediately. "They wanted you to know where she was. She says there are men with her. At least 3. And she says Audra looked at the phone in her hand. She says one of them told her to tell me that the offer is simple. Calibration data for Tessa. 1 hour. At 3:47 in the morning, Caleb stood up. "Still on the line?" Audra handed him the phone. "Tessa," he said. "My name is Caleb. I know you've seen me before at the hotel. Can you talk to me for a minute?" A sound that wasn't quite yes. Wasn't quite a sob somewhere in the compressed middle of someone keeping themselves together by focusing on the next breath. "I need you to look around the space you're in," he said, without making it obvious. "Just tell me what you see. Ceiling height. Windows or no windows. What the floor is made of." A pause. Then Tessa's voice, quieter than it should have been, working at steadiness, high ceiling. Maybe 30 feet. No windows I can see. The floor is concrete. There's a smell like oil or machinery. Any sound from outside? Traffic, water, anything? There's a sound like something mechanical. Intermittent. Like a pump or something. Are the men near you? 2 of them are across the room. The third one is... A pause. He's watching me. "Okay," Caleb said. "Here's what I need you to do. Nothing. Don't try anything. Don't argue with them. Don't make them nervous. Just sit. Can you do that?" "Yes." A breath. "Yes, I can do that." "I'm going to find you," he said. Not as a comfort measure, as a statement of what was going to happen. He handed the phone back to Audra and moved to the window. His mind was already working the geography. The description Tessa had given was limited, but it had specific qualities. High ceilings, concrete floor, mechanical sounds, smell of oil, industrial space. The intermittent pump sound narrowed at water management equipment, possibly, or industrial cooling. That combination in this city meant a specific set of possible locations, mostly concentrated in the Port District and the older manufacturing corridor along the river's east bank. He called Cord. It rang twice. Cord picked up, sounding like a man who hadn't slept but had been awake in a productive way. "We have a situation," Caleb said, and gave it to him in under 90 seconds. Location characteristics, timeline, the nature of the exchange being demanded. Don't make the exchange, Cord said immediately. I know that, Caleb said. We can have a tactical team in how long, Caleb said. Pause. 25 minutes to assemble and deploy. The hour runs out in 53 minutes, Caleb said, which means the real deadline is probably 35, because they'll move before the stated time if they think something is happening. He paused. I need to be in that building before your team gets there. Rourke, not to engage, Caleb said, to make sure they don't kill her when they hear sirens. The silence on Cord's end had the specific texture of a man weighing a decision he didn't love against the alternatives he liked less. I can give you a 20-minute head start, Cord said. After that, my team moves regardless of where you are in the building. That's enough, Caleb said. Caleb, it was the first time Cord had used his first name. Don't get her killed trying to be a hero. I'm not a hero, Caleb said. I'm a maintenance worker. He ended the call. Audra was on her feet. I'm coming with you, she said. No, he said, she's my assistant. She works for me. She is in that building because of me, and you walking into that building is exactly what they want, he said. They took Tessa because they want the calibration data. Calibration data is in your head. You walk through that door, you hand them everything in one step. She opened her mouth, closed it. I know, he said. I know it feels wrong. It doesn't feel wrong, she said. It feels cowardly. It's not cowardly, he said. It's the correct tactical decision, and you know it. He looked at her. Stay here. Stay on with Cord's people. When I have Tessa, I'll call you. She looked at him for a long moment, the same look from the ballroom, from the 9th floor suite, from every moment in the last week when the situation had pushed up against the edge of what either of them could control. The look that was the beginning of a sentence she still didn't have the rest of. Don't, she started. I'll be careful, he said. That's not what I was going to say, she said. He didn't ask what she was going to say. He took his jacket from the back of the chair and went. The Port District at 4 in the morning was its own specific kind of empty, not the empty of a place that had stopped, but the empty of a place in between. The long mechanical pause between the night shift and the morning shift when the work was done, but the workers hadn't arrived yet. The streetlights were the sodium kind, orange-yellow, and they turned everything the color of an old photograph. The river smell came in off the east bank with the wind, industrial and cold. Caleb drove the perimeter of the district once before stopping. He'd been here before twice on maintenance calls that had taken him to facilities on the river road, and once years before that in a life that had no official record. He knew the geography the way he knew most things he'd needed to know, not with affection, but with the particular intimacy of attention. The mechanical sound Tessa had described narrowed it to 3 possible buildings in the East Bank corridor, 2 former processing facilities, and 1 converted cold storage warehouse that had been empty for 18 months, listed for commercial sale, accessible from both the river road and the secondary industrial access route that ran behind it. He left the car on the river road and went the rest of the way on foot. The warehouse was right. He knew it before he reached it, the way you know some things not from a single piece of information, but from the accumulation of small details that added up in the right direction. A vehicle parked on the access road with its nose pointed out for fast exit. A light in a window on the building's west side that was too deliberate to be accidental and too dim to be functional. The particular stillness of a building with people inside it trying not to be heard. He did a full perimeter walk, slow and close to the building's walls, using the shadows the way the building's own architecture provided them. He counted entry points: the main loading dock on the south face, a personnel door on the east wall, a fire exit on the north side that had been chained from the outside, and a rooftop access hatch above a maintenance ladder on the west face that the chain on the fire exit suggested they hadn't thought about. He went up the ladder. The rooftop was flat and graveled and cold, and the hatch was padlocked, but the padlock was the cheap kind, not the structural kind, and he had the right tool for it in the kit he'd been carrying since the hotel. The hatch opened with a sound that was too loud in the silence, and then stopped being too loud as the ambient noise of the building's interior, the mechanical pump, exactly as Tessa had described it, cycling somewhere below, swallowed it. He went down through the interior maintenance access into the building's upper level, a secondary floor of catwalks and equipment housing that ran the perimeter of the warehouse's main space. He moved flat against the catwalk rail and looked down. The main floor was 40 feet below. The ceiling he was near was 30 feet above it, which put the catwalks at roughly the 20-foot level, high enough for a full view of the space, low enough to hear conversation if it was above murmur. He found Tessa immediately. She was sitting on a folding chair in the center of the warehouse floor, her hands zip-tied to the chair's frame, her face doing the same thing it had done in the ballroom, that very contained, very deliberate effort at not coming apart. She was in the same clothes she'd been wearing when she'd called Audra from her car 2 hours ago. She looked tired and frightened, and also, he noted, like someone who had decided to keep it together and was succeeding at it by a margin that was thinner than she wanted. 3 men. One near the east wall, weapon visible, watching the personnel door. One near the main loading dock, partially obscured by a stack of old industrial shelving that was still bolted to the wall. And one, the third one, the one Tessa had said was watching her standing 20 feet from her chair, arms crossed, facing her. The third man was different from the other two. He was leaner, controlled in the way of someone who had trained not for size but for precision. He had a radio on his belt, and the particular attentiveness of someone who was running the room rather than occupying it. Brenner. Caleb didn't know the name, yet he'd learn it later, from Cord's debrief, from the files that would eventually be declassified in the parts that could be. But he recognized the type. He'd worked against this type, and in a different time and a different life, alongside it. The operational lead. The one who didn't panic and didn't improvise and made the decisions that the other two waited for. He was also the one standing closest to Tessa. Caleb moved along the catwalk toward the south end of the warehouse, which put him directly above Brenner's position. He went slowly, distributing his weight across the old steel, grading with the patience of someone who understood that the sound of one footstep at the wrong moment was the difference between a plan and a crisis. He checked his phone. 8 minutes had passed since he'd entered the building. Cord's team was 11 minutes out, give or take, moving without lights or sirens on the River Road approach. Caleb had told Cord's coordinator to hold at the 200-meter mark until they heard from him, which Cord had agreed to with the visible reluctance of a man who was agreeing because the alternative was worse. 9 minutes to work with, maybe less. He looked down at Brenner, looked at the chair, looked at the angle from the catwalk to the floor 20 feet, old steel construction, the catwalk rail rated for 200 pounds of static load, which told him something about what it was probably not rated for. He'd made worse decisions. He'd made better ones too, but this was the one available, and available was what mattered. He timed it to the pump cycle, 3 seconds of increased mechanical noise, enough to cover the sound of movement, not enough to cover a full action. He went over the rail when the pump cycled up, dropped through the space without thinking about the 20 feet, or the concrete floor, or the knee that had been complaining for a week, and landed on Brenner with everything he had. The impact was brutal for both of them. Caleb took the hard part in his left shoulder, and his already damaged knee screamed in a way that he registered and immediately set aside, because the alternative to setting it aside was lying on the floor of a warehouse, and he didn't have time for that. Brenner went down underneath him, driven by the weight and the angle, and Caleb had approximately 4 seconds before the other 2 men processed what had happened and acted on it. He used 3 of those seconds to make sure Brenner wasn't going to get up quickly, and the 4th to put himself between Brenner's body and Tessa's chair. The man at the east wall was faster than expected. He had his weapon up and was covering the distance across the warehouse floor, and Caleb had nothing between him and what was in that man's hand except the industrial shelving unit on the east wall that he'd noted on the way in 12 feet of old. Welded steel, bolted to the wall at the top but free at the base, and he made the calculation in less than a second. He hit the base of the shelving with his shoulder, and it came off the wall, in the direction he needed it to, not perfectly. Not in any way that a reasonable person would call controlled, but it came down across the approaching man's path with enough mass and noise to make the difference. The man went sideways. He didn't go down, but sideways was enough. The man at the loading dock fired once. The shot went into the concrete floor 6 feet from Caleb, which told him the man was shooting under pressure and at a bad angle, which meant he was nervous, which meant he could be managed. Caleb's voice, when he used it, had a quality that he'd had to develop and had never entirely understood the mechanism of not loud, but carrying, kind of voice that cuts through noise and confusion, because it sounds like the only calm thing in the room. Federal agents are outside this building right now, said. This ends one of 2 ways. You put the weapon down, you get to be arrested. You don't, you get something else. The man at the loading dock held. Caleb could see his hands, the small tremor in the grip, the weight shifting. I'm not bluffing about the federal agents, Caleb said. Your radio has been jammed for the last 4 minutes, which is why you haven't heard from anyone outside. Your exit on the access road is blocked. There are 2 ways out of this building, and both of them go through people who are not going to let you leave the way you came in. None of this was entirely accurate. The radio jamming was real. Cord had confirmed it in the last update before Caleb went in, but the rest was constructed from what Caleb knew Cord's team was capable of and delivered with the conviction of a man stating facts rather than building a story. The line between those 2 things was, in his experience, mostly a matter of tone. The man at the loading dock set his weapon on the concrete floor. The one who'd been on the east wall, still tangled in the down shelving, didn't move toward his weapon, which Caleb took as a functional surrender. Then the doors came open, the personnel door and the loading dock simultaneously, Cord's team moving in 2-point entry with the controlled efficiency of people who did this for a living and had done it enough times that it looked almost routine. It was not routine. Caleb had done enough of it himself to know it was never routine. That the people running through those doors were carrying the same cold surge of their own systems working against them that every person in a breach had carried since the beginning of time. They were just trained to move through it rather than freeze inside it. In under 2 minutes, it was over. Brenner was on the floor in cuffs, conscious and bleeding from where Caleb had landed on him, saying nothing and looking at the ceiling with the closed expression of a man doing calculations about his future. The other 2 were secured. Cord's team was working the space-checking corners, clearing the building level by level. Caleb went to Tessa. She was still in the chair, still zip-tied. Nobody had gotten to her yet in the controlled chaos of the room. He crouched in front of her and used his knife to cut the zip ties, and she was shaking. Not dramatically, not loudly, just the fine continuous shaking that a body does when it has been holding itself together too long, and the immediate reason for the holding is gone. Hey, he said, it's over, you're okay. I know, she said. Her voice was mostly steady. I know I'm okay, She looked at her wrists, where the zip ties had been. I'm just really, really angry. He almost smiled. That's fair, he said. They left me my phone on purpose, she said. So I'd call Audra. I know, he said. She didn't come, Tessa said. Not accusatory. More like she was working through it. Told her not to, he said. Tessa looked at him. Good, she said after a moment. That was the right call. A pause. My daughter, she's fine, Caleb said. She's at home. We're going to get you there. Tessa nodded. Once, twice, like her head was heavier than usual, and the movement took more effort than it should have. Then she did something that surprised him. She put her hands over her face for about 3 seconds, just 3, and he heard her breathe through it. And then she took her hands down, and her face was almost entirely composed. Okay, she said. Okay, he said. Cord found him near the east wall a few minutes later, while the room was still full of agents working their sections, and Tessa was being attended to by a medic. Brenner, Cord said. I saw him on the way in, Caleb said. He was running the room. He's Kessler's operational director, Cord said. If we can turn, he'll flip, Caleb said. Give it time. Men like that make the calculation. He paused. He's not ideological. He's professional. When it becomes professionally rational to cooperate, he'll cooperate. Cord looked at him with the slightly narrowed attention of someone recalibrating an assessment. The way you came in, Cord said. Through the roof. It was available, Caleb said. You dropped 20 feet onto a man. 19, Caleb said. Maybe. Cord looked at the catwalk above them, looked at Brenner on the floor, looked back at Caleb. Your knee, he said. Is fine, Caleb said, which was not accurate, but was accurate enough for the present conversation. We need you checked by the medic after I call Audra, Caleb said. He moved to a section of the warehouse wall away from the activity and called her. She picked up before the first ring finished. Tessa is safe, he said. She's with federal agents. She's okay. The silence on Audra's end lasted 2 seconds, which for Audra Sinclair was a geological age. She hurt, Audra said, her wrists, superficial. She's coherent and she's angry, which means she's fine. Another pause. And you, I'm standing up, he said. That's not what I asked. I know, he said. I'm standing up and I'm not bleeding, which is better than the last time you asked. The last time I asked, your ear was bleeding, she said.
Right.
So this is an improvement. He heard her exhale, long, controlled, the exhale of someone who had been holding their breath since he'd walked out of the 9th floor office and was now allowing themselves to stop. "Come back," she said. It was a simple thing said simply. "I'll be there in an hour," he said. He ended the call and stood in the warehouse with his back against the cold concrete wall while Cord's team finished their work around him. His knee was in fact not fine. It was doing something specific and insistent that he was going to have to pay attention to, eventually, probably starting tomorrow, probably in the form of an ice pack and a conversation with himself about the long-term cost of using his body, as though it were the same body it had been 15 years ago. He looked at Brenner, still on the floor, still looking at the ceiling. "Kessler," Caleb said, walking over. Brenner didn't look at him. "He'll cut you loose," Caleb said. "The moment it's operationally useful, he'll let you take all of this." "Nothing. You know that," Caleb said. "You already know that. You've worked with men like him long enough to know exactly how this calculation goes." Brenner's eyes moved to him. Just his eyes. "You don't know anything about the men I've worked with," he said. His voice was flat and British, and had the clipped quality of someone managing pain. "I know Kessler sends other people into warehouses," Caleb said. "And I know where Kessler is right now." A pause, where Brenner said, "Somewhere not in a warehouse," Caleb said. Brenner looked at the ceiling again. But something in the set of his jaw had changed something small, barely visible, the specific shift of a man who is doing the calculation, and is closer to a result than he was 30 seconds ago. Caleb walked away. The debrief ran until nearly 8 in the morning, and by the time Caleb got back to the 9th floor of Audra's building, the city outside the windows had moved completely into day-flat gray autumn light coming in off the street, the sounds of the regular world reassembling itself, delivery vehicles and office workers, and the specific hum of a city that had no idea what had happened the night before. Audra was at the long table with coffee she hadn't touched, and her laptop open to a screen she wasn't looking at. She'd changed her shirt at some point during the night one of the building's corporate supply closets, probably, which he noted as something he would have done himself in the same situation. She looked at him when he came in. She looked at him the way you look at a person when you've been deciding for several hours how you feel about something, and the thing is standing in front of you, and you're still not completely sure. "Down," she said. "I'm fine, you're limping," she said. "Sit down." He sat. She poured coffee into the second cup that had been sitting beside hers and pushed it across the table to him. Picked it up and drank it, and it was very good coffee, which he noted with the distinct appreciation of someone who had been operating on insufficient sleep and adrenaline for the past several hours. "Cord called me," she said. "He told me what you did." "Cord tells you things," Caleb said. "We've developed a rapport," she said. "He's worried about your knee." "My knee is fine." "He said you dropped 20 feet onto a man." 19, Caleb said, and then realized he'd said the same thing to Cord and almost laughed. Audra looked at him with an expression that was not entirely readable, which was unusual she was, in his experience of her, someone whose face said something, even when what it said was controlled or held back. Right now it was doing several things simultaneously, and he wasn't confident he could accurately translate any of them. "The evidence from the warehouse," she said. "Cord's team found communications equipment." "I heard that," he said. "They found a direct channel," she said, "between Brenner's operation and another node in the network." She looked at her laptop. Vasquez's team spent the last 2 hours working through it. "There's enough to place Kessler in direct operational command of the hotel attack, the penthouse breach, and last night." She paused. "It's not everything Cord needs, but it's close." "How close?" he said. "Close enough that Cord is calling it actionable," she said. "Pending Brenner." "Brenner will cooperate," Caleb said. "Give him 24 hours. "Vasquez thinks 12, Audra said. "She says men like him start the calculation immediately. They just take time to finish it." He drank more of his coffee. Outside, the gray light was becoming something slightly warmer as the morning moved forward, still cold, still autumn, but the particular oppressiveness of the 4 a.m. hours was gone. "There's something else Cord told me," Audra said. He waited. "He said that with the warehouse evidence, the hotel attack record, the operative we caught here, and the internal conspiracy data from the engineer who sold the specifications," she paused. "The case against Helix is becoming structurally complete. It doesn't have Kessler at the top yet, but it has everything around him. And when Brenner talks," Caleb said, "it has him." "Yes," she said. But until then, she set down her coffee cup. "Kessler knows the warehouse failed. He knows Brenner is in custody. He knows his remaining operational capacity in this city is severely limited." She looked at Caleb directly. "Which means his next move is either to run or to..." Use the only leverage he has left, Caleb said. He said it at the same time she reached that point, and they both stopped, and she looked at him with the recognition of two people who have been in a crisis long enough to think along the same lines. June. He was already reaching for his phone. Renata picked up on the first ring this time. She's fine, she said before he could speak. She's right here. She made me wake up early because she wanted to video call you. Put her on, he said. June's face appeared on the screen, sleep-rumpled, wearing a sweatshirt he'd packed for her, sitting at Renata's kitchen table with the particular expression of someone who had been awake for at least an hour and was managing the early morning through willpower alone. You look terrible, June said. Good morning to you too, he said. Did you sleep? Some, he said, which was technically true if you counted the 40 minutes in the car before Tessa's call. She looked at him, that look, the 9-year-old one that was actually 35, and had always been, and she said, is it almost over? He thought about the warehouse, about Brenner doing his calculation, about Cord's team and Vasquez's team, and the communications evidence, and the case that was becoming structurally complete. Almost, he said. Almost means not yet, she said. I know, he said. A little longer. I need you to stay where you are for a little longer. She was quiet for a moment. He watched her process it, the small movements of her face, specific way she held herself when she was working at accepting something she didn't want to accept. Okay, she said. But Dad, yeah. When it's over, she said, I want to go somewhere different, not back to the apartment. He looked at her on the small screen. What do you mean, different? Somewhere that's actually ours, she said. Not just somewhere we're staying. Somewhere, she thought about it, somewhere with a yard. He looked at his daughter's face on the screen, the gray morning light, coming through Renata's kitchen window behind her. The sweatshirt's slightly too big on her, the way he'd bought it, because she grew fast, and he'd learned to buy things with room in them. Somewhere with a yard, he said. For Biscuit, she said. We haven't gotten a dog yet. We're going to, she said, with the certainty of someone reporting a fact. He didn't argue with her. He told her he'd call her in a few hours, told her to stay inside, told her he loved her in the understated way they both operated, and ended the call. He set his phone on the table. Audra was watching him. Not intrusively just watching, the way she did most things, with the attention of someone who processed information through observation. She sounds like you, Audra said. She sounds like herself, he said. She doesn't sound like me, the directness, Audra said. The not wasting words. He thought about it. Maybe that part, he said. She was quiet for a moment. The office around them had the particular atmosphere of a space that had been a crisis center for 12 hours, and was now in the ambiguous aftermath, papers out of order, cups at different stages of empty, top screen having gone dark from inactivity. After this is over, Audra said, carefully, what happens to you? He looked at her. To you and June, she said. Cord told me that the operation that was classified, Seawolf, that your connection to it means certain people will always have access to a file that points back to you, even after Kessler, even after Helix is dismantled. I know, he said. So you move again, she said. Different name, different city. He was quiet for a moment. June asked me for somewhere with a yard, he said. That's not an answer. I know, he said. But it's where I am right now. She looked at him for a long time. He held the look without looking away, which was a habit he'd developed not from confidence but from the understanding that looking away from things didn't make them smaller. For what it's worth, she said, I think you're the most capable person I've encountered in a very long time. That's a low bar, he said. You've been dealing with people trying to kidnap you for 2 weeks. That's fair, she said, and something crossed her face that in different circumstances would have been a smile. She opened her laptop. The screen came back up, showing the communications analysis Vasquez's team had sent through an hour before. Cord wants a call at 9, she said, to discuss the next steps with Kessler. I'll be there, he said. And the calibration data, she said. I want to discuss the transfer protocol we talked about, moving it to the secure server before Kessler can make another move. We'll do that today, he said, before the call. Good. She looked at her screen, then back at him. Caleb. Yeah, thank you, she said. For Tessa. He'd been thanked for things before, in different contexts, in different rooms, by different people who meant different things by it. He understood the difference between gratitude as a transaction and gratitude as something that cost the person saying it something real. This was the second kind. She held together well, he said. In there, she was scared and she held together. She's stronger than she looks, Audra said. Most people are, he said. The morning moved forward. The city outside the windows moved forward with it. And somewhere across the city in a federal holding facility, a man named Brenner was finishing a calculation that had been running since the moment Caleb landed on him from 20 feet up. And the answer he was arriving at was the one Caleb had known he'd arrive at, because men who were not ideological eventually came to the same conclusion when the numbers stopped working in their favor. And somewhere beyond that, somewhere with resources still, and a name that Cord was getting closer to, by the hour Darius Kessler was looking at a situation that had gone wrong in every direction he'd planned and was now making the kind of decision that men in his position made when the walls started coming in. The question was not whether Kessler would make a final move. The question was whether Caleb and Cord and Audra and every resource currently pointed at the problem would be ready when he did. The 9 o'clock call would start it. Caleb drank the rest of his coffee and looked out at the city and thought about a yard, and a dog that didn't exist yet, and a daughter who was going to be furious, and then fine, and then already planning the next thing, before the current thing was fully behind them. Because that was who she was, and where she'd gotten it from wasn't entirely clear, but she had it completely. He stood up. His knee made a sound. "Medic," Audra said without looking up from her screen. After the 9 o'clock, he said. Before, she said. He looked at her profile, the focused attention on the screen, the rolled sleeves, the coffee cup at her elbow that she still hadn't finished, the bandage on her left hand from the doorframe, small and white against her skin. Before, he said. Brenner talked on the 18th hour. Not the 12 that Vasquez had predicted, not the 24 that Caleb had estimated 18, which landed somewhere between both of them and satisfied neither, which was probably the most honest outcome available. The conversation lasted 4 hours and was conducted in a federal building conference room, with Cord on one side of the table and Brenner on the other, and a lawyer between them, who spent most of the time taking notes and very little time objecting, because Brenner had decided to cooperate, and men who had decided to cooperate didn't generally need their lawyer to slow things down. Caleb wasn't in the room. He was in a waiting area down the hall, in a chair that was designed more for discouraging loitering than for human comfort, with a cup of coffee from a machine that did the minimum required by law to justify calling itself coffee. His knee was wrapped. The medic, before the 9 o'clock call, had confirmed what he already knew, which was that dropping 20 feet onto a concrete floor with an existing injury was a decision he would be paying for physically for the next several weeks, possibly longer, and had given him a compression wrap and a look that communicated professional disapproval without requiring words. Audra was 2 chairs down from him, working on her laptop with the focused attention she brought to everything, the kind of focus that was itself a form of composure. They'd been in the building since 7 in the morning. It was now past 2 in the afternoon. Tessa had gone home at midnight to her daughter, a 7-year-old named Claire who had been with a neighbor, and who, according to Tessa's text to Audra at 1 a.m., had fallen asleep waiting and was now in Tessa's bed and was fine. Completely fine, and Tessa was lying next to her and also fine, and everyone was fine. The word fine appearing in the text 4 times in the way that a word does when the person using it is still convincing themselves. Cord came out of the conference room at 2:17. He looked like a man who had gotten something he'd been working toward for a long time and was not yet ready to process how he felt about it. "Kessler," he said. Caleb stood. His knee registered the movement. "Brenner gave us the operational chain," Cord said. "Full communication logs, financial transfer records, 3 physical locations we didn't have." And he paused. "A scheduled contact protocol between Brenner's field operations and Kessler's personal secure line. The next scheduled contact is in 41 hours. You can trace the line," Caleb said. "We already are," Cord said. "And with the communications evidence from the warehouse and Breener's testimony and what your Ms. Sinclair's technical records provide on the stolen specifications." He stopped, visibly choosing not to finish the sentence with anything that could be interpreted as premature confidence. "You have him," Caleb said. "We will," Cord said. "It's going to take time. International coordination, jurisdictional—" "How long?" Caleb said. Cord looked at him steadily. "Months," he said. "Possibly more. But the architecture is there. Kessler doesn't know what Brenner gave us, which means he doesn't know to run yet, and when he does find out," he paused. "By then, it won't matter." Caleb absorbed this. Months was a long time. It was also the first timeline he'd heard in 2 weeks that had an actual end in it, rather than just more open space. Audra had closed her laptop and was listening. In the interim, Cord said, looking at both of them, we can offer protective protocols. I know what you can offer, Caleb said. I need to think about what I need. Cord nodded. He'd learned, over the past 2 weeks, not to push Caleb on the logistical questions, because pushing produced the same answer in the same tone at different times of day, and the answer was always some version of "I'll handle that part." There's one more thing, Cord said. He reached into the folder under his arm and produced a single sheet of paper, not a form, not a report, something that had the look of a document that had been generated by a very specific and very quiet process in a very specific and very quiet part of the federal bureaucracy. Seawolf, he said, the official record. Caleb looked at the paper without taking it. The official record currently classifies all personnel as killed in action or missing, Cord said. There's a provision narrow, rarely used, requires sign-off from 3 offices that allows for a record to be amended in cases where the original classification was operationally protective but is no longer serving that function. Meaning, Caleb said. Meaning your name can be removed from the killed in action listing, Cord said. You won't get your old identity back that's gone, and it's better that way. But the record that says you're dead will be amended to say that information was incorrect. He paused. Doesn't change much practically, but it changes something. Caleb looked at the paper for a long moment. You'd still be Caleb Rourke, Cord said. June's father, the maintenance worker. That all stays. But I'm not a ghost, Caleb said. You're not a ghost, Cord said. He took the paper. He didn't read it. He already understood what it said. He folded it twice and put it in his jacket pocket and nodded once, and Cord took that for what it was and excused himself back down the hall. Caleb stood in the corridor with the folded paper in his pocket and the federal building's institutional light above him and the particular sound of a place full of people doing consequential work at low volume. He stood there for a moment that was longer than it needed to be and shorter than it felt. Audra came to stand beside him. Not close exactly, but nearby, in the way of someone who understood the difference between company and intrusion. Okay, she said. Working on it, he said. She nodded. They stood in the corridor for another moment and then they walked toward the exit together. And neither of them said anything. And that was enough. He drove to Portland 2 days later. Not to bring June back, not yet. Cord had been clear that yet was the operative word, and that yet meant at minimum another 6 weeks while the Kessler operation developed enough to confirm the threat level was reduced, but because he needed to see her. Needed it in the specific way that couldn't be met by a phone screen or a text message, the way that only proximity could satisfy, which was something he hadn't let himself acknowledge for most of her life, because acknowledging need was something he'd trained out of himself so thoroughly that getting it back required deliberate effort. He arrived at Renata's house on a Thursday afternoon. June was in the backyard. When he pulled up, he could hear her through the fence, explaining something to what turned out to be a neighbor's cat that had wandered in, and was tolerating the explanation with the supreme indifference of cats everywhere. She heard the car and came through the gate and stopped when she saw him, and then crossed the yard in the particular way she had of moving, when she was trying not to look like she was running, which was itself a kind of running. He caught her when she got to him, and she held on longer than usual, which she would have attributed to something else if he'd pointed it out. So he didn't point it out. You look better, she said into his shoulder. I slept, said. You smell like coffee. I've been driving 4 hours, he said. There was a stop. She pulled back and looked at him with the systematic assessment she'd been doing since she was about 6, checking for things he wouldn't volunteer, evaluating the data he'd present against what she suspected the full data set contained. Your knee, she said. It's wrapped. Is it better? Getting there, he said, which was true. The medic had been right. The first week was the worst of it, and the second week was an improvement, and by the third week it would be functional enough that he could stop thinking about it. Aunt Renata made me do math worksheets, June said, with the gravity of someone reporting a human rights violation. She's a retired teacher, he said. What did you expect? I expected a vacation, June said. This is not a vacation. You're in someone else's house for safety reasons, he said. It was never a vacation. I know, she said. I'm just saying. She took his hand and pulled him toward the house. Come inside, she made soup. He spent 3 days in Portland. He slept in Renata's guest room on a bed that was slightly too short and had a quilt that smelled like cedar, and he woke early both mornings and sat at Renata's kitchen table with coffee while the house was quiet. And he let the quiet be quiet, which was something he was still learning to do. June made him watch 2 episodes of a nature documentary series she'd discovered, and he watched them both and asked questions he was genuinely curious about, and she answered them with the focused precision of someone who had thought about these things thoroughly, which she had. On the last morning, she sat across from him at breakfast and said, without preamble, "Are we going to move again?" He set down his fork. "Yes," he said. "To where?" "I've been thinking about Montana," he said. She was quiet, processing. "There are mountains," he said. "An actual space. And the schools are good." "How do you know the schools are good?" "I looked it up," he said. "I've had a lot of time in waiting rooms recently." She considered this. "Montana is far from everything," she said. "That's one of the things I like about it," he said. She looked at her cereal bowl. Looked up. "Would we have a house? Like an actual house?" "Plan," he said. "Something with a yard." Something shifted in her expression. Not dramatically. June didn't do things dramatically, as a rule, but the particular shift of a person who has been holding on to something with both hands and is now, carefully, loosening the grip. "Okay," she said. Okay, Montana," she said. "But I want to help pick the house." "You can see pictures," he said. "I want to see real pictures," she said. "Not the listing photos where everything looks bigger than it is." "How do you know listing photos make things look bigger?" "Aunt Renata showed me real estate apps when she was trying to explain square footage for the math worksheets," June said. "It was actually interesting. The photos use wide-angle lenses." He looked at his daughter, who was 9, and knew about wide-angle lens distortion in real estate photography, because a retired school teacher had incorporated it into a math lesson, and he thought about all the things she absorbed without effort that he'd never taught her and never could, because some things came from the accumulation of ordinary days rather than from anything intentional. "Real pictures," he said. "I'll find real pictures." "And Biscuit," she said. "We haven't gotten a dog yet." "Montana has a yard," she said. "There's no reason not to." He didn't argue with her. He'd stopped arguing with her about the dog approximately 48 hours ago, when he'd realized that the argument had already been decided and he simply hadn't updated his position yet. The months that followed were the longest and the most ordinary of Caleb's adult life, which was itself a kind of remarkable thing. He and June moved to Montana in November, a small town called Carver's Ridge, 40 minutes from the nearest city, situated between a mountain range and a river valley in the specific way of places that look like they were arranged by someone with strong opinions about views. The house was a 3-bedroom with a covered porch and a yard that was not large by any objective standard, but was large enough, which was the only standard that mattered. Caleb found work with a local architectural firm, not as an architect, not yet, but as a draftsman and site consultant, someone who could look at a building and understand how it was put together and what it needed, which turned out to be a skill set that translated from maintenance into construction design more directly than he'd expected. He enrolled in coursework online, the kind that fit around a work schedule and a 9-year-old's school calendar, and he was not the best student in any of the courses, but he was consistent, and he finished what he started, which was its own kind of qualification. June started at Carver's Ridge Elementary in the 2nd week of November, which was not an ideal time to start at a new school, because the social architecture of 4th grade was already established and inserting a new element required navigation. She managed it the way she managed most things systematically, without drama, identifying the people worth investing in and investing in them with the focused attention that was her primary social currency. By December, she had 2 friends she could name and one she was still evaluating. Biscuit arrived in December. He was a 3-year-old rescue of indeterminate breed, something in the medium-large range, brown and white, and prone to sitting in inconvenient locations with an expression of great personal satisfaction. June named him before they left the shelter, which Caleb took as evidence that the name had been decided some time before they arrived. Biscuit adapted to the house and the yard and the mountain air with the equanimity of a dog who had decided that wherever the food was, that was home. June adapted to Biscuit, with something that looked very much like love, which she would have denied if described in those terms. Caleb adapted to both of them the dog and the version of his daughter that emerged in the Montana months, slightly less guarded, slightly more willing to just sit somewhere without needing it to be purposeful, and he found that adaptations easier than anything he'd done in recent memory, which told him something about where the difficulty had actually been located all those years. He talked to Cord once a month, then once every 6 weeks, then once every 2 months as the operational tempo of the Kessler case shifted from active development into the long, grinding jurisdictional work that international cases always became. The case was building. Cord said this each time with the same careful containment, the same disciplined refusal to call it finished before it was finished, and Caleb respected that enough to match it. He talked to Audra more than he would have predicted. Started professionally, she needed to consult on technical details related to the Helix case, questions about the calibration data's transfer protocol, follow-up from Cord's office that routed through her. Then it became less professional, which neither of them formally acknowledged. She called on a Thursday in February to say that Tessa had returned to work and had reorganized the entire communications department in a way that Audra suspected was therapy disguised as productivity. He said that sounded right. She said she'd thought he'd think so. They talked for an hour and a half. He was sitting on the porch of the house in Carver's Ridge with a blanket and a cup of tea he'd switched to tea on the evenings when June was asleep. Something about the house's particular quiet made coffee feel wrong at that hour, and the Montana sky above him was doing what it did in February, which was stars in a quantity and clarity that still surprised him, months in. "How's the knee?" she said partway through. "Better," he said. Mostly, she said. "There's a particular angle," he said. "Going downstairs. It's fine." "You dropped 20 feet onto a man," she said. 19, he said. "We've been through this." She made a sound that was definitely a laugh, slightly reluctant, the kind that surprised the person making it. "June," she said. "Good," he said. "She has a dog now." A theoretical dog. "He's named Biscuit," Caleb said. "He sits in the middle of the floor in doorways." "Why?" "I don't know," he said. "He seems to think it's strategic." Audra laughed again, less reluctantly this time. He told her about the house, about the architectural firm, about the coursework. She told him about Project Nightingale, which had been formally transferred to a secured government partnership and was moving forward in a form that had been substantially redesigned to eliminate the vulnerabilities that Helix had exploited. She told him about the internal audit that had followed the engineer's arrest. The man's name was Devereaux. He'd been extradited from overseas and was cooperating in exchange for a reduced charge, which Audra described with the measured tone of someone who had made peace with an outcome she didn't entirely like. "The inside source," Caleb said. "He needed money," she said. "His mother was sick. I understand it." A pause. "I don't forgive it. But I understand it." He thought about that for a while after they hung up. The distinction between understanding and forgiving, the space between those two things. How much could live in that space, and how little attention people paid to the difference. He sat on the porch until the cold drove him inside, and then he went and checked on June still asleep. Biscuit at the foot of the bed, in the specific position of a dog, who had been told he was not allowed on the bed and had negotiated a settlement. And he stood in the doorway for a moment, just looking, which was something he'd done since she was born, and had never fully explained to himself, and didn't try to. The call from Cord came on a Tuesday in March, 14 months after the hotel. Caleb was at the architectural firm, looking at site plans for a renovation project on the River Road, when his phone buzzed. He looked at the screen. He stepped outside. "Tell me," he said. "International operation completed this morning," Cord said. Darius Kessler was arrested at a residence in Lisbon. Portuguese authorities coordinated with 4 other jurisdictions and our office. A pause. "He's in custody. He's not getting out." Caleb stood on the sidewalk outside the architectural firm in Carver's Ridge, Montana, with the March wind coming off the mountains and the sun at the angle it got in the early afternoon, flat and clear and cold. "Helix," he said. "Is collapsing," Cord said. "Has been for 3 months. Since the financial transfer records Brenner provided let us move on the subsidiary networks. Kessler was the last structural element. Without him." He stopped. "Done, Caleb." The word settled somewhere. "June," Caleb said. "The threat classification was formally downgraded this morning," Cord said. "You and June are no longer considered active targets. Your current identities are clean. There's nothing pointing to Carver's Ridge from anything connected to Helix." Another pause, longer. "You can stop waiting." He stood with the phone against his ear and the mountain wind moving through his jacket and the ordinary sounds of a small town going about its Tuesday around him, a truck on the main road, a door opening somewhere, a dog barking 2 blocks away, and he thought about all the things that stopping waiting meant. It meant June could go to school tomorrow without the thing he carried in the back of his mind every morning when he watched her walk through the door. It meant he could stop checking the perimeter of the house before he went to sleep. It meant that what they'd built in Carver's Ridge, the house, the firm, the school friends, The dog who sat in doorways was actually theirs. Not temporary shelter. Not a held breath waiting to exhale. Theirs. Thank you, he said. We got there, Cord said. Simple as that. He ended the call and stood on the sidewalk for another minute, just standing. And then he went back inside and told his supervisor he needed to leave early for a family thing, which was true in every sense that mattered. Picked June up from school at 2:30, which was an hour before the usual time. Came out of the building, looking at him with the expression of a person running rapid diagnostics. He was standing by the car, not running, not tense, expression not doing anything alarming, and she slowed from the initial half-jog to a regular walk by the time she reached him. You're early, she said. I know, he said. Are you okay? Yeah, he said. I have something to tell you. She looked at him. The diagnostic expression again, more focused now. He told her. Not everything, not Kessler's name, not Lisbon, not the operational details, but the fact. The essential thing. That the people who had made it necessary to leave were no longer something either of them needed to worry about. That the danger she'd known existed without him telling her directly, because she always knew, was gone. She listened to all of it standing on the school sidewalk with her backpack on, and her jacket half unzipped the way she always wore it, despite his repeated observations about the temperature. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. We can stay, she said. Here, in Carver's Ridge. That's what it means. Yeah, he said. She looked at the school building behind her. Looked at the mountains visible above the tree line at the edge of town. Looked at him. Okay, she said. Okay? What else would I say? She said. But her voice had something in it that wasn't in her voice, most of the time something that required more structural support than her usual tone. Something that was working at staying level. You can say whatever you want, he said. She didn't say anything. She stepped forward and put her arms around him in the parking lot of Carver's Ridge Elementary. With other kids streaming past and a teacher holding a door open at the top of the steps, and she held on. He held her back. They stood like that for longer than either of them would have described as appropriate for a school parking lot, and neither of them cared. Biscuit, she said. Eventually, into his jacket. What about him? I want to take him to the river, she said. This weekend. That trail you said we'd do eventually. We can do that, he said. And can we get burgers first? The place on Millward, not the one downtown. The one downtown puts too much sauce. Sure, he said. And can we— She stopped. He felt her take a breath. Can we just not do anything important for a while? He pulled back enough to look at her. She was looking at him with her mother's eyes and his jaw, and the combination of things that were entirely her own that couldn't be attributed to either of them. Yeah, he said. That's exactly what we're going to do. She nodded, pulled her jacket zipper up finally, which he chose not to comment on. They drove home. The following Saturday, they took the trail to the river. Biscuit walked between them in the way that had become his preferred hiking arrangement, slightly ahead, pausing periodically to confirm they were still behind him, then moving forward again with the satisfied expression of a dog who had taken on trail leadership without anyone formally assigning it. June talked about marine biology. For the first half-mile, she'd shifted from whale migration to deep-sea ecosystems, which was a natural progression, she explained, with the logical coherence of someone who had clearly thought about the syllabus of her own interests. Caleb listened. He asked questions. She answered them with great seriousness. His knee managed the trail without significant complaint, which he took as evidence of progress. They ate their lunch on a flat rock above the river, which was running fast and cold with the March snowmelt, clear enough that they could see the bottom in the shallower sections. Biscuit sat between them and divided his attention between the food and the water, with the focused diplomacy of a creature managing two compelling options. Do you think fish know they're in a river? June said. What do you mean? Caleb said. Like, do they know the river is a specific place, or is it just where they are? Is there a difference to them? Thought about it. I don't know, he said. Probably no concept of it as a specific place. Just water, current, food, shelter. But they navigate, she said. Salmon come back to the exact river where they were born. So they know something. They know something, he said. Whether they know it the way we know things, different kind of knowing, she said.
Right.
She considered this, eating her sandwich, watching the river. I think about that sometimes, she said, about whether knowing something and understanding it are different. What do you mean? Like I knew we might have to leave Carver's Ridge, she said. I knew it was possible, but I don't think I understood it. Not really, she paused. And now I know we don't have to leave. But my brain keeps doing the thing where it checks. Checks for what? For whether it's real, she said. Whether we actually get to stay. He looked at his daughter on the flat rock above the river, 9 years old and already carrying the weight of contingency, the habit of holding things loosely because things had been taken before. He recognized it because he'd built it into himself over years of deliberate effort. And watching it in her, watching something he'd cultivated in himself as a survival skill show up in her as a wound, was one of those things that didn't have a clean emotion attached to it. It's real, he said. I know, she said. I just need to let my brain catch up. Fair, he said. Take your time. Biscuit put his head on June's knee. She put her hand on his head without looking at him. The automatic comfort of two creatures that had gotten used to each other. They sat by the river for a long time. Long enough that the light shifted, the angle changing the way it hit the water from flat white to something warmer. Long enough that Biscuit gave up on the remaining sandwich possibility and curled up between them and went to sleep with the absolute commitment of a dog that had decided the moment was sufficient. Caleb watched the river. He thought about the hotel ballroom and the coffee urn and the 3 men he'd never expected to face. He thought about a gray uniform and a mop cart and the way 400 people had looked through him every night for 3 years as though he were furniture. He thought about Cord and Brenner, and the woman in the ventilation shaft, and the 18 hours it took a professional to make a calculation that was always going to come out the same way. He thought about Seawolf, and the name on a manifest that had said he was dead, and the paper in his jacket pocket that said the record was being corrected. He thought about Audra, about a woman in a $12,000 gown, pressing herself against a marble pillar, and saying 3 words with no panic in them, just fact, just information delivered to whoever was standing close enough to hear. They're here for me. And he had been standing close enough. And he had been the wrong person. By every conventional measure, wrong uniform, wrong context, wrong history, according to everything that had been filed and classified and recorded as finished. But he had been there. And sometimes that was the whole of it. He thought about what winning looked like. And the answer that came to him was not the arrest in Lisbon, or the warehouse, or the moment Cord said it's done on a Tuesday sidewalk. Those were the punctuation marks. They mattered. But they weren't the thing itself. The thing itself was here. This rock, this river. This girl explaining fish cognition with the seriousness of a doctoral candidate. This dog asleep between them with absolute faith in the sufficiency of the moment. This ordinary afternoon in a town that was theirs now. Actually theirs. Not held on contingency, but owned outright in the way you own things when you've decided to stop waiting for them to be taken. He had spent years being someone who survived. He was learning, slowly and with the particular difficulty of habits trained into bone, to be someone who simply lived. It was harder than surviving. He hadn't expected that. Surviving had rules. Protocols. Clear objectives move toward safety. Move away from threat. Make the next decision and the next one, and keep the most important thing protected. Living didn't have those structures. It was open in a way that was disorienting. An endless series of moments that didn't require response, just presence. Just being there. He was getting better at it. Not good. Better. June finished her sandwich and leaned against his shoulder in the way she had the sideways lean that was not a hug, not a childlike snuggle, but a specific physical statement that meant I'm here and you're here. And that's enough right now, and he let himself simply sit with that instead of scanning the tree line, or calculating exits, or running the next iteration of what could go wrong. The river ran. Biscuit breathed the long, slow breath of a dog in deep sleep. Above the tree line, the mountains held their position with the indifference of things that had been there longer than any human trouble, and would be there long after it, which was either humbling or comforting, depending on how you chose to hold it, and Caleb chose to hold it as comforting, because that was the kind of choice available to him now. Dad, June said. Yeah, I'm glad we came here, she said. To Montana. Me too, he said. It smells good, she said. The air. Cold, he said. Cold and good, she said. He put his arm around her. She didn't move away from it. They sat by the river until the afternoon light began to flatten, and the temperature made itself known in the specific way of mountain evenings, the cold that comes not suddenly, but with certainty. Then Caleb stood his knee, going down off the rock, reminding him it was still there, that some things stayed and helped June down, and woke Biscuit, who took 3 full seconds to decide whether waking was worth the effort, and then committed to it entirely. They walked back the way they came. Caleb walked with his daughter and her dog on a trail above a river in a town that was theirs, and the gray uniform and the mop cart and the ballroom, and all of the things that had come after, were behind him, not gone, not erased, not clean in any way that life ever actually gets clean, but behind him, where the past belongs, where it waits without following. The man who had been a ghost was not a ghost anymore. He was a father on a trail, listening to his daughter explain bioluminescent deep-sea organisms with a focus and detail that would have impressed a marine biology professor, making a mental note to find a book on the subject that she didn't already have, thinking about dinner, thinking about the covered porch, and whether the temperature would stay above freezing tonight, thinking about nothing consequential at all, and that specific, ordinary, unheroic nothing was what he had been fighting for. Not the victory, the afternoon after, not the end of danger, the beginning of ordinary, not survival, a life.